Welcome to Coffee Talk. I am your host, Chris. This is my other sometimes occasional podcast where we talk about things that I like. My co-host today is Phil Elmore.
Hi. The flow is so natural and non-awkward.
Yeah. Oh, I was hoping you'd have that cup. Yes, the Ron Collins mugshot from prison cup. Yes.
I actually don't like when I put it in the cupboard, I have to kind of move it so that it's behind the upright between the two doors so that it's not staring at me from the cupboard. That blank, like, why do you keep putting me in prison, Phil? Kind of look.
The irony that you're literally putting him in a cupboard as well. Yes.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
And mine is, of course, one of my
Now, see,
favorite
that's
people.
adorable. It looks
Yeah.
like one of those mugs, though. Like some mugs get so elaborate that they reach a point where their functionality as mugs is somewhat degraded.
Yeah. This rides that line real
It
close.
is. It's close. It's on the
The
mark.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to drink out of, but it's functional. This is the only non-microwave mug that I actually don't put in the microwave because I don't want anything to happen to it.
Yeah.
All right. So you love this little show. I love this little show. This little show called Longmire. And I just finished watching all of them again, and I fear that maybe the last thing you remember at all was the very last scene, but we're going to try this anyway. You are pretty adept at writing characters, and I will still do some minor posts about scenes and the symbology with scenes in the show because I like it a lot, but particularly in writing a character for a show, it seems to be like one of the hardest things you can do. So let's start with the importance of the world. Let's say you're writing a book, you're writing a story. Do you create the world first and then put characters into it? Do you, because I realized a couple days ago that Absaroka County is a character on that show. It's intrinsic to Longmire. So speak to that however you want to.
It is, but the external forces, the environment in which the character finds himself, that's important. But if you haven't defined the character, then it doesn't really matter. So, some of the classic story tropes, like the fish out of water trope. Well, if you don't know what the fish is like, you don't know what the out of water consists of. So, and I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I'm just saying the external environment works with the character in a certain way. So you have to have the character defined before you do anything else. In my opinion, a story almost writes itself if you know the character really well. So, for instance, I wrote 24 Mac Bolan executioner novels, and the character's pretty simple. Once you get kind of into a groove where you're in his head, he's very predictable in certain ways. He's a static character. He's not dynamic. He doesn't change over the course of those books. Knowing him well, you not only know what his dialogue sounds like. So when he speaks, he tends to speak in a certain way. And I hear his voice in my head when I write the character. But more importantly, no matter what situation you confront him with, you know how he'd react. So really, you're just creating a situation, putting the character into the situation and letting him write himself out of that situation. One of the biggest complaints by, those books were ghostwritten by a number of different authors after the original author sold the series. And one of the biggest complaints that some fans had about certain books was that the character was doing things he wouldn't normally do or saying things he wouldn't normally say. When I first started that series, Jerry Van Cook, the author who was sort of the bridge that got me in the door with the editor there, he said, look, Bolan doesn't question his mission, doesn't shoot the wrong person, never endangers innocence. He's a paladin character, and he's not morally tortured. He's not sitting down at night going, oh, what am I doing with my life, killing all these people? No, he's like, yes, I shoot terrorists in the face. I'm good with it. And I never shoot the wrong person. That's one of the reasons that in Punisher Warzone, right, the one with Ray Stevenson in that movie, right out of the gate, he shoots an undercover cop by mistake. You can never do that to a vigilante character because it robs him of his moral authority. But more importantly, it's something the character wouldn't do because the character's never done it. And so in the case of Longmire, Absaroka County is sort of inextricable because Walt is a creature of that environment. He was born and bred by it. You know, you sort of picture him inseparably linked to it in terms of how his demeanor is. He's a cowboy character. It's very much a Western. Absaroka is sort of this throwback to a Western time that no longer exists in the rest of the outside world, as represented by the many times the outside world intrudes on Absaroka, and everybody's upset about what these newfangled, casinos and
Yeah.
businesses and whatnot, or even just mining companies, what those new influences are going to do to the character of this treasured environment, which is sort of fixed in time and place in an almost out of time kind of way. If it gets if the iron horse comes through here, it's going to ruin the county. That kind of thing, and we see that over and over again. And Walt, actually, his character arc through the course of the series is very slow, but it does
Yeah.
happen as represented by the phone at the very end. They hammer
Yes.
that Walt doesn't have a phone, Walt doesn't have a phone. So by the end of the show, yes, he's accepted the phone, but it's not about the phone. It's about the fact that by the end of the show, he's let go of torturing himself over what he thought was his great sin involving avenging his wife's murder. He's let go of his hatred for certain recurring almost villain, almost frenemy characters throughout the course of the series. He changes a great deal in very subtle ways by letting go of the fixed points that drove him so hard in so many early episodes. So it's really it's the kind of beautiful character study that can only be done when you have a central controlling authority who's responsible for the story. Some of the best shows on television have one person behind them. The guy who did Breaking Bad, whose name I can't think of at the moment. The reason Breaking Bad is so good is because one guy made sure that story was consistent from start to finish. Another really surprising example, Rebecca Sugar from Steven Universe. Steven Universe is basically a children's show. It's an inclusive, gentle, warm-hearted program, but it has my respect as a writer, because not only does she do brilliant writing throughout the course of that series that is very consistent, very character driven over years. We have hints at character development in the first season that don't pay off until a few years down the road. Not only that, they never feel like they have to crap on the white male characters to make the other characters feel included and empowered. And they don't spoon feed you the story. They show, don't tell. They drop you down in the middle, like the middle of a Hemingway story, and you just figure it out as you go. It's a brilliantly written and really kind-hearted show.
Okay, so which you pretty well summarized Walt and his character arc. So we'll lead with that instead of going back to what I was going to say about Walt. I've noticed that Katie, his daughter, like Walt, becomes more focused on doing things the by the book way, and he figures out how to go with the flow, and including with his job, and less about trying to force things, I guess. Whereas Katie who is the most annoying character on the show, by the way. I'm not a fan of Katie. That's just my opinion. And
There's a good reason for that.
And she's the opposite. She learns to not do things so by the book, and learns that sometimes you can do a quote unquote wrong thing for a right reason, and that the situation determines what that is. And I think she's an excellent foil for his character. And I haven't seen that another time where a close family member, certainly a son or daughter, is the foil for a character in this sort of series. And maybe that's just me. There's so much.
I think there probably are examples of that in a comedy setting. The first show that came to mind was actually Sanford and Son, and probably Archie Bunker, probably another good example where his son-in-law is a foil.
I mean, I'm not saying that there's not a Tao of Sanford and Son, but I mean, like in a dramatic,
Yeah, well,
series.
Sons of Anarchy. There's a lot of familial foiling going on in Sons of Anarchy. It's not quite the same dynamic, but and Yellowstone, another good example where he has a contentious relationship with his children.
Okay.
But I kind of lost interest in Yellowstone when they started talking about Kevin Costner leaving the series. You really want to avoid Earth Final Conflicting yourself. Earth Final Conflict was a brilliant show for exactly one season, and then the guy around whom the entire show was built said, "Nah, I think I'm done." And then they kept making the show after he left, and it's
Oh,
like, no, you should have stopped. Should have
okay.
stopped at one, moved on to
Yeah.
something else, because
No.
what they produced after that was never good. The reason you're annoyed by Katie is because she's a poorly developed character. She's not consistent. She has some storylines that kind of pick up and then end. She can't seem to decide who she is because the writers can't seem to decide who she is.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying before, and I don't know if the vagaries of the internet cut me off, consistency is critical to a character, and it's one of the reasons that Walt is so well done, because he's consistent
Yeah.
and he develops in a logical way. But if you're not consistent, that's the death of a character. And in Katie's case, she you don't really know who she is, because at any given moment the writers are like, well, I think today she's going to feel bad about shooting that guy, and then I think tomorrow she's going to be a whore, and then the next day she's going to decide for no reason at all that she wants to be in law enforcement, even though she really had no desire to be in law enforcement for most of the series. And even though none of us can picture her being a decent sheriff, but by the end, sure, she's running for sheriff, that's fine. It doesn't make any sense, and it's annoying for that reason. So I kind of hate the
Okay.
character, and I tolerate her presence because Walt is so awesome. But
I j-
it's just
I just dislike her as like she's not the kind of woman I'd want to hang out with or even have coffee with because
well, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of TV characters you wouldn't want to hang out with. I just got done watching The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and I
oh,
would
is it good?
love to hang out with. I'd love to hang out with Nicolas Cage. Like, that's the kind of night of drinking that ends in both of you in a drunk tank somewhere. Because I've seen footage of him hanging out with Vince Neil, where both of them are so drunk they're doing that like drunken, come on, man, grabbing each other and slapping each other kind of thing. Where you got to get it together, man. It's very much like the sequence in the movie where Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal are on drugs and acting bizarre
Of
because of it.
the meme.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the meme is, I love the meme format, but that dynamic, I guarantee that's what it's like to hang out with Nicolas Cage when you've both been drinking too much.
Hmm. You're probably right. Yeah. Okay, so Branch, and this is a well, I'll save the part B for shortly. Who is Branch as a character? Which can I just say, okay, maybe Katie falls under second most annoying character on the show. After Branch passes away tragically, she becomes number one most annoying. But Branch
Yeah.
is his walk. Who walks like that? I'm just saying. It's the weirdest walk I've ever seen in my life, and he leans into
Well,
it. Like he thinks he looks good. Anyway,
it
who
may
is?
be there's a Nicolas Cage connection here, because I saw a behind the scenes interview with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage about the movie Face Off, where one of them, and I think it was Travolta, said that when he starts designing a character, he starts with a walk. And it was very important for the two men to decide how the two characters would walk, so that when they switched, they could switch their body language, and visually you'd be getting the same cue of the
Wow.
previous character. So like they decided one of them, their natural walk was the default for one of the characters, and I can't remember which one it was. So in Branch's case, he may have been doing a specific walk for the character, or it may just be how that dude walks. And if that's how your gait is, why not lean into it, because it works for the character. He
Yeah.
was a swaggering,
Okay.
arrogant
Yeah, you're right.
character,
Yeah.
so it would make sense to use that as a bug, not a feature. Branch's character,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we did not get the appropriate amount of development for him, because if I remember correctly, the actor left the show. And I don't know if that was when they had to hop networks, because I think it was AMC canceled the show and then Netflix picked it up, or
A and
I
E.
don't remember, or yeah, whichever network it
One
was.
of those.
Um, I don't remember what circumstances he had to leave, but they basically set it up so that if he had come back, he wouldn't have been dead. But because he didn't come back, he was dead. So
Well,
you leave it ambiguous.
I think it was important. I think that number one, to show that Barlow is in all likelihood a genuine psychopath, and so we have
Well, yeah.
a genuine expression of psychopathy on the show, and also what happens to someone. And most of us have probably seen that in real life, or at least heard of it, where someone starts going down a dark path. And in his case, it was centered around vengeance, and all of his idiosyncrasies, we'll put it that way, as a person. There he is. You hear that?
Wow, that is a loud engine.
Yeah, I knew it would happen. All of Branch's idiosyncrasies as a person were sort of hijacked, and had he been a different character at his core when he was injured and poisoned and mentally tortured, basically, he might not have died. But
Well,
who he was at his core was the problem, and it was exacerbated by that. And so it's a beautiful picture, a terrible picture of what can happen down that path. So I think,
but if the actor had come back, they wouldn't have killed him. Like, they killed him because they had to. So it would have been the case that he miraculously survived being shot. It's just
which
kind
I
of
guess
sad.
they could have done, because they didn't actually show where he was shot.
Right. If you remember correctly,
yeah.
He gets shot, and then there's a cliffhanger, which I think was the ending of that season, and we don't find out what his fate is until the next episode.
Yeah.
So I can't recall if that happened at a season break or if it was like a mid-season break, but either way, it was a huge cliffhanger at the time. So,
okay.
So yeah.
With Branch, though, because of that fact, this may be hard to testing 1, 2. Hello.
Yeah, the connection glitched out, and there was a little bit of a lag.
So because of that fact, this may be a hard question to answer, but who does Branch represent as a character? If you were writing Branch, what is he? What's his purpose?
Well, he starts out as a foil for Longmire because he's competition. He's a competitor.
Sure.
And I think he's meant to be sort of a good-natured counter. And they were maneuvering him in that direction when he and Katie started a relationship. And then it kind of got weird. Some of that might have been because the actor was bored. You could even argue that almost none of the characters in the show are particularly well drawn compared to Longmire, because the show's in love with him. But like Vic's character, they can't decide, is there sexual tension between her and Longmire? Like, by the time that finally comes to fruition, it almost feels kind of like, I guess, like it didn't feel all that natural to me.
Okay, since you went there, because I will forget this. I was thinking about that. Remember, I think it was season, I don't know, mid-series somewhere. You're right. There were these occasional, and at the time when they did it, I thought A&E or whoever had it, I think it was still A&E, like when Vic and Walt they're on a stakeout and they wind up at a hotel and they're right next to each other, and then they go to the bar, and so you've got, about a good 20 minutes of most of the show is tension between them. It felt contrived and like, oh, they're trying to put the two main together to bolster interest in the show because we're losing young viewers or something. It felt contrived, but then as that continued to happen, by the end, with that last bit, that kind of made all that, it justified it. It was like, it made it real suddenly, like all these parts that seemed kind of lame, they suddenly didn't seem lame.
Yeah.
And
I think it may have been that they're like, well, this is laid in there, so let's turn it into something, and obviously whenever you're writing a show that takes place over a long period of time, when you get to the end, you can always make it seem like, no, I meant to do that. That's how the end of like Revenge of the Sith, there's a really heavy attempt to go, I meant to do everything. And really, no, you're just trying to make it work.
Trying to fit those puzzle pieces together. So we're going to trim off the edge of the jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
Lucas made a valiant attempt to put everything together in Revenge of the Sith in a way that said, I meant to do all of that. But it's like, wink.
Yeah. Well, I must respectfully, I'm not disagreeing, but here's my input is the phone thing. I did a little post on his phone and the owl and all of the message of the phone, which has his wife's voice on it. It's the first thing that the outside world is greeted by. And like you said, oh, going back to what you said about frozen in time, Absaroka County is frozen in time. All of this, I think, at its core. So you are right. They wrote Walt first, and then everything else is centric to Walt. Even the environment, even Absaroka County, is really, that's about Walt and his wife and hanging on
Yeah,
to. That's
there's
what
a
that
college
whole,
essay paper somewhere in there about how external influences threatening to change the county eventually dovetail with Walt accepting change, something that he's not good about. That by the
yeah,
end, he's done.
yeah,
And that's a character arc. It's a very satisfying character arc. By the time that phone rings and he picks it up and says hello, not only is it see what we did there, he's got a phone now, but it's
yeah,
also a really nice note of hope. It's a note that says the show is over, but Walt goes on, and
yeah.
I love that about it.
And I may be reaching here, but here's what I was coming around to eventually is it's a new phone. That phone is Vic. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Up to a point, yeah, maybe.
And besides, she's always the one on his case about not getting a phone. But and let's since this has turned into less about characters and more about the elements of characters, which I guess is what you need to write good characters. So let's run with that. Vic and Walt are like, okay, so Vic is like super tough on the, she's Philly, she's tough on the outside. Um, but she's really tough on the inside. She's tougher mentally and emotionally than any of the guys in the station, which I think is especially Branch, which is hilarious. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, and but on the outside, it's this wonderful juxtaposition because she's a woman and she's Katie Sackhoff, and so there's that.
Yeah,
And
well,
Walt,
and that we see her at low points too. The PTSD she gets from being
oh God,
abducted,
yeah,
all that
yeah.
stuff, and
Uh, and conversely, Walt is, well, just like when Katie finally got to spend some time with him relating to the job, she was like, "Well, I had no idea that you were able to just be you. I thought you had to be tough for your job." And that's exemplary of how Walt is still probably the most heartfelt, tender, um, morally structured person on the show, but he's also physically the gruffest person on the show. And so even in that last scene, of course, we really see that because he's got scars everywhere, and we see his scars throughout the show, but he's like gnarly and so the juxtaposition of these two characters getting together, it's almost a cliche, they complete each other type of thing, but anyway, I liked that and how, therefore, that juxtaposition of each other kind of amplifies their inherent, you know, character qualities. So,
I
what do you
I
think?
think so. I was always a little uncomfortable with their ultimate relationship, only because he's so much older.
It's
So
maybe, yeah,
she's old enough. Their ages are such that she could be his daughter. It wouldn't be that big a stretch. Vic and Katie are essentially contemporaries to each other. So
mm,
it made me a little uncomfortable just from a propriety standpoint. Also, she's kind of a dirty whore. So Walt is such an upright moral character that when I say that, I don't mean I'm not actually passing judgment on her character. I'm saying that the type of
I don't know, you
personality
kind
she
of are.
represents, it's like I don't have anything against dirty whores, especially in the context of fiction, but he's such an upright moral character and he's tortured by his past sins. So for him to take up with her, you almost feel like they'll date for 6 to 8 months, but it's not really going anywhere before they're at each other's throats. Like, I don't know what the future of that relationship would really look like. But there also is some suspension of disbelief. You want the characters to have kind of a happy ending. So you can picture her settling down and not being quite so flighty because all of the supporting cop characters had their departures from duty where their personal lives got in the way of them doing their jobs. Ferg, even though he's the steady, everyone's good buddy, you can picture wanting to hang out with Ferg and you'd be able to trust him. He's a good guy. He's loyal to a fault. But even Ferg had some difficulties when it came to like his girlfriend's mom and his other personal entanglements, where he you know, bent the lines and did things he knew he shouldn't do. So I think in exploring all of those characters, for one thing, if they were perfect and they always did everything by the book, there wouldn't be a show, you know. And part of us longs to see the police do things they're not supposed to, because actually being a police officer, to see it from the outside, would be huge periods of boredom punctuated by sudden action. You know, if you've ever watched Cops, that's essentially what's going on. They've just edited out all the huge periods of boredom for the sake of the show. So I think watching those characters interact, you I don't know how human they really are, like how realistic they are as people. Walt, because the camera is pretty much on him the whole show, he is the most complete character. Everyone else is, up to a point, almost kind of a caricature, an exaggerated version of themselves. Ferg is as good old boy gets, in terms of he's the buddy. He's the guy that you love, like, boy, he's a good guy. That's all you can say about Ferg. Right down to the way he carries himself. The car that he drives, that stupid Camaro that he drives around in for most of the show. And Vic she's a little flighty, a little out there. There's a little bit of sexual tension. Part of the problem is that Katie Sackhoff is one of those people that a lot of the time she looks like if you touched her, her skin would be sticky. So like she's attractive, but in kind of a kind of way, which is that's just how she comes across on the screen. And then you've got Branch's, Captain Strong Jaw hunk guy, and except that he's constantly getting unraveled to the point where, instead of being, hello, I'm the handsome, strong-jawed wannabe sheriff, I have problems, which really makes him more, it makes him more interesting. Right. If you didn't have that, he'd be really dull. But all of these characters spend so much time moving away from their baseline that you're really not sure if the baseline defines who they are as characters. There's a reason that when you watch an action movie, like the movie SWAT, for example, the very first thing you'll see is the SWAT team doing a job where everything goes like it's supposed to. That establishes a baseline so that when we later show you the SWAT team doing a job where everything goes pear-shaped and something goes horribly wrong, you have a frame of reference for what normal is versus abnormal. The same is true when you're dealing with characters and character beats. You want them to have a baseline. This is how this character normally behaves, so that when they depart from their normal way of being, you have something to contrast to. But if they're always coming unraveled, it's hard to say what normal is for that character. Now they're just kind of all over the place, which is why Katie's so annoying, because Katie has no baseline. She's always running around like Kermit the Frog in the Muppet Show going, ah! There's always something wrong with Katie.
I think maybe that's the other reason I don't like her, is I'm not saying I'm intolerant, but anyway. So I want to.
Well, it's fiction. You're allowed to like or not like.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah.
You're not hurting anybody. The actors will be fine.
Yeah. Which, okay, since you use someone's real name, I just want to say that I do not personally endorse any statements made about Katie Sackhoff by my co-host today.
I'm not indicting her as a person. I'm just saying, on screen when she's playing these characters, it was the same in Battlestar Galactica. She had the same demeanor in Battlestar Galactica, where she just seemed kind of sweaty, even when she wasn't perspiring, and that's just how the character expresses itself on screen.
The one thing I didn't like is it was up there with Branch's walk, was how she, top 3 buttons always undone, always hands on her hips, all, very female posturing. That would never be allowed, even in the Absaroka County Sheriff's Office with the shirt. Just saying.
No, but I mean, you have to make concessions to appeal to the viewer. I mean, you're not going to cast an attractive, very sexually charged actress, which is definitely what she is, and then not make use of that. In the very first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, everyone was wearing a uniform except for the Counselor Troy, whose boobs are out for the entire first season and thereafter. They modified the outfit to sort of de-emphasized that a little, but it was many seasons into Next Generation when she finally started wearing a uniform. And the way they worked it in was they had this hard-ass captain take over the Enterprise briefly, and he's like, yeah, from now on, put on a uniform. He essentially said, put those away. And it was an act of greater respect for the character. But clearly, when they started, that's what they were doing. I mean, why do you think on Voyager 7 of 9 was introduced? She was easily the most interesting character on the show for many seasons, but they put her on the bridge to get them out there. It was these are overt acts of what today we would call fan service. They are meant to attract an audience and hold it. I remember my father never liked the same types of television shows I liked when I was a kid, except he watched the Linda Carter Wonder Woman with me.
Oh,
There's a reason that producers do these things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so there's always an element of practicality. Like, yeah, okay, that's overtly gratuitous, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Roger Ebert used to complain bitterly that Hollywood had forgotten that boobs exist. Roger Ebert was apparently something of a perv, and he liked him some boobs. If he was going to watch an R-rated movie, he wanted to know that they had earned their R rating, because if you remember, there was a time, especially in the 80s, where an R-rated action movie, guaranteed somebody would take their shirt off at some point. It was almost like, well, we want to secure that R rating, so make sure that there's this amount of profanity and make sure someone's boobs are out. And so Hollywood, in general, has this love-hate relationship with the way they exploit female talent. And we all know what they're doing. We all know why they're doing it.
Yeah, which we're digressing from Longmire, but funny thought, is it Under Siege with Seagal and Tommy Lee Jones as the villain, and for whatever reason, is that the submarine one where for whatever reason there's a cake and the lady comes out of the cake? That's
No,
what immediately came to mind.
that's the original Under Siege.
Okay.
Erica Eleniak is sort of inserted into the storyline
Oh,
just
and
to be
you
a
know
pretty
her
girl
name,
who's
of course.
palling around Seagal. That's her only reason for existing is
Right.
to sex up that movie a little bit.
Great example. So there you go. And of course you would know her name, but
My brain is a lint trap for movie trivia.
so you make great point. Which, by the way, I notice the point of this was to have like a relaxed. This is coffee talk. This is not an interview. This doesn't have to be structured. And here I am trying to structure it. So I apologize to my viewers. We're just going to talk about
Well, I think you're
like.
I think you're overthinking it. I mean, we have topics of discussion. We have points of entry into discussing Longmire, so it's got to start from somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
Even though I keep trying to drag it into shows that have nothing to do with Longmire, because they're all interconnected. There's, how story works. I have a bad habit of, when I talk about writing, I tend to talk about movies because many people have seen those and it's a point of reference. But the writing of a visual medium is the same. And when I write, I tend to write very visually anyway. So if you were to take a novel that I wrote and turn it into a movie, most of the work is done for you in terms of the visuals. But a screenplay is not a novel. A screenplay is dialogue and set instructions, but it isn't described in the same way that a novel is, unless you're reading something by Shane Black, who is sort of legendary for editorializing in his instructions in screenplays.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so going back to Vic and Walt, or maybe, hey, let's sidetrack to Walt's other women. This is, and maybe this is why maybe this is one of the many things subconsciously I like about Walt is he'll find something about someone that's not quite right. But
almost like a Seinfeld character.
Yeah. So what was her name? Lizzie, the wealthy ranch ranch lady. She
was the girlfriend before the social worker or whatever she was.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was clearly very attracted to Walt. She was very willing, let's say, whereas he had to go after social worker lady a little bit more. I think Walt's relationships over the course of the show are always cast against the light of his undying loyalty to his wife. I mean, I think isn't it in the last episode when he finally takes the box and buries it or scatters the ashes or whatever he does with it? I forget.
It's the end of, I think, season 4.
Okay, so it's not at the end of the show, but
No,
it takes
no.
him a while to get to that point where he's willing to let her go. So I think the having Walt date, I mean, apart from just giving the characters a B storyline, something to do that occasionally meshes with the A storyline and sometimes doesn't. So there's a practical consideration. But mostly it's, I think, in terms of his overall character development, it's to show he's struggling with moving on after the love of his life has passed. Every woman that he's with from that point forward will have to struggle to compare themselves to his wife, at least in his mind, maybe. I think that's one of the reasons it might make more sense for him to end up with a Vic, because she's so different from his original
Yes.
wife. There's really no comparison. So comparing the two of them as apples to oranges, she would never feel like she didn't measure up, because it's a completely different scale. It's just a
Yeah,
completely
that's a
different
good
type of
point.
person.
Yeah, maybe so.
And that might
I
be
mean,
why I'm a little more comfortable than I would otherwise be with the age difference, because the characters go together.
hmm, yes. And well, okay, so Lizzie, ranch lady, is like you described her perfectly. And she's very nice. Uh, but she's clearly a little jealous, clearly kind of would want Walt all to herself, including with like when if they ever really got together, probably his devotion to his job would be a problem. Social worker
Well,
lady.
doesn't she doesn't Lizzie leave because she can't handle the dangerous life of an action star? Like, doesn't she leave because it's too dangerous?
No, Vic. She believes, and it turns out she's right. So Lizzie's maybe not so
Oh,
stupid that
yeah,
Oh yeah, and remember when she leaves that night, because Vic was hiding out at Walt's place because
right.
yeah, whatever's
Yeah, it's
Gorski.
been a little while. I want to say that they at least had a conversation at some point where she was a little uncomfortable with the fact that when you're the protagonist of an action series, bad things happen to you and everyone you love. So, the rule of thumb
Yeah,
is never marry the guy from Knight Rider, never start dating the star of an action show, because you will die. Chuck Norris got married and his bride was immediately kidnapped. Michael Knight on Knight Rider got married and his bride got shot almost before the wedding was over. You just don't do that. You stay away.
okay. So anyway, um, man, I'd forgotten all about that. Thank you. Um,
You were
so
moving on to social worker lady whose name I don't remember.
thank you. Yeah, yeah. So social Donna, um, and this is no, it's not a slight against. It's possibly a slight against social psychologists, um, which is very, very different from clinical psychology. Just so everyone knows, but like a lot of psych professionals, particularly social psychologists, including a couple people that I went to school with, and they became that. She's real good at nothing's really right or wrong, everything's shades of gray, and um, just trying to justify any and every action with logic. And Walt, when her kid shows up out of nowhere, Walt finds out from the kid that, oh, well, she's had a bunch of uh, sordid relationships and she kind of moves from guy to guy to guy to guy and probably has a real broken wing thing going on with each of them. And when Walt and Vic go to her house because she's gone missing, it becomes clear that how is she getting all this money? She has some illicit funds from somewhere, and it's never really talked about past that episode. But I feel like Walt has such a strong moral core, and everything is relative to Donna. Like they connected, and they were both very smart people, but she didn't seem to have any true guiding principles. So you've got Lizzie, who's this wonderful woman, but she's kind of ditzy, and then the polar opposite of that. And then, so they both disappear. And Vic, she has an incredibly strong moral core, but she's not even aware of it. So she's not
Yeah,
self-righteous about anything. Her life is her job. Everything that comes up, she's immediately telling Branch, Ferg, whoever, here's my experience, here's what I think you ought to do. This is wrong, this is immoral. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. She is a very strong moral character. She just isn't sanctimonious about it in any way.
She's not introspective. She does not spend a lot of time
Yeah.
thinking about what she thinks.
Yeah.
So she just kind of gets swept along. Like life events happen to her almost out of her control many times. Like, what? I have to buy a place to live now? I guess I'll buy this camper because someone I talked to had a camper. You know, like she just kind of gets pushed along by the winds of fate because she doesn't stop to think about what she thinks. She's not in her own head. And
Yeah.
whereas you get the distinct impression that Walt has spent a lot of time inside his own head thinking about not only his own moral code, but his own sins. Because he's, especially in the first few seasons, he's obsessed with them until he finally, you know, enough stuff happens in the show for him to break out of that, because he and Henry have this horrible secret to start with, you know, or at least what they think is a horrible secret to start with, which I don't know. I feel like sometimes those things get adjusted on the fly because sooner or later someone's like, I don't know if we should have them have committed a really unforgivable sin. Because when you do that, then you paint yourself into a movie morality corner. Every television show has what I call movie morality. It applies to movies, it applies to TV. When a character does something truly unforgivable, you can't then turn them into a hero, because there's always at the back of your head going, I don't know if Jason Statham should be part of the Fast and Furious family because he did murder Han that time in cold blood. And oh, look, Han's alive. That's what we call retconning, so that you can make the character a hero. Oh, no, he didn't really commit this horribly unforgivable sin. He just wanted to.
Yeah. What I was leading to is, because of the problems between these two women and Vic, in spite of her little problems, like it couldn't have been anyone else when you think about it. He couldn't have wound up with anyone else, which is, you're right. I understand what you're saying. It looked weird even for a minute. It felt kind of weird, but
yeah,
like, anyway. Okay.
There wasn't anyone introduced into the show who would have been a better match. The only way they could have done that is if Henry and Walt were gay. Like Henry's the only character who might have been a better match for Walt on a personality level.
Yeah.
You know, and so we haven't talked about Henry at all, which is funny because he's so integral to the show.
That was actually going to be the next thing.
Oh, but you know, it's hard to know where to place him in the context of all these other people, because Henry is almost like the narrator. He doesn't do any narrating, but if he had, like, if he was an extra dimensional being, he'd be narrating like the Watcher in What If.
Okay.
You know, because Henry is almost exists on a level above everyone else's action, even though he gets pulled into storylines.
Yes.
Because he's almost a secondary pivot. The show clearly rotates around Walt, but occasionally we spin off our axis and we start rotating around Henry for a while before we make our way back.
You know, that's really good. I like that, because when he, by the way, massive spoilers if you haven't already gathered that.
Longmire's been out for so long. If you haven't watched
I know. But anyway, so
and Adam, is it a spoiler that they're not gay? we didn't say what those storylines were.
Yeah. But Hector. So when Henry becomes the new Hector and starts enacting vigilantism, first from a place of feeling like everything, the gravity of this season kind of wound up at the end with him at the wall where they received messages, and he's like, well, someone's got to do, and he felt pressured by the fans. It sounded like the universe was telling him, be the new Hector. So it was one of these inexorable, inescapable kind of, even though it turns out terribly. But anyway,
yeah, it's almost like, it's like Kick-Ass. He's not good at it.
Okay, yeah, that's true. In spite of taking boxing, it's like, it takes boxing classes and totally is good at it, and then in real life doesn't implement any of that. It was terrible. But anyway, what you said about him being sort of this, extra, sort of the ethereal spirit of the Red Pony that is characters go and commune with for higher wisdom.
Yeah, he's Jiminy Cricket to Walt a lot of the time.
Okay.
He's sort of an external conscience. Conscience.
Yeah.
And the thing with Henry is his motivation is largely driven by his concern for the well-being of his people. That's a really integral part to his character. And it's why he gets so mixed up with Nighthorse, because Nighthorse is he's a bad guy, but he's not that bad, but he's not good, but he's not entirely evil, but I wouldn't trust him. And so Nighthorse oscillates between, like, Walt for most of the series is like, Nighthorse is evil and we must get him. By the end, he's mellowed a little and he's more like, Nighthorse is who he is. But he's not a good guy, but he's not evil incarnate. And we
Right.
keep switching back and forth, and Nighthorse's storylines switch back and forth. Like, I'm motivated by the good of our people, but it wouldn't hurt if I made a profit. And I don't like that this bad thing happened, but I'm going to look the other way for the sake of this thing. And I've got pressure that makes me do this. And I'm kind of an organized criminal, but I'm not as bad as those organized criminals. Back and forth and back and forth for the whole show.
Yeah, exactly. That was going to be the next character I want to talk about. But Henry, like, oh, that's what I was. So he's Jiminy Cricket, the ethereal Jiminy Cricket that people commune with, and then it's like, as he becomes Hector, and maybe this is a trope, I don't know, but when he tries to directly interfere with the affairs of the mortals, basically, he gets all tangled up and karmically.
Yeah,
he has all kinds of problems.
He spins off his axis. It doesn't go well for him because he's always been a character who was better geared towards dispensing wise advice, not deliberately interfering in the lives of people. Because every time he does that, invariably it goes sideways, and he's just not good at direct action. And so he ends up under the thumb of people who catch him at this, Nighthorse, and I forget the name of our primary res police officer. What's his name?
Man.
Both good characters. I just don't remember their names.
Excellent characters. We just can't remember their names.
I think they did a very good job, and this is one of the marks of good character development.
I
think they did a very good job of making sure that nobody was a cartoon. They all had good points and bad points. And even when they were opposed to Walt, it wasn't Snidely Whiplash, I'm gonna twirl my mustache while I put you on the train tracks kind of, two-dimensional villain. There was always more motivation there, and a feeling that you could reason with these people up to a point. Nighthorse could be reasoned with up to a point. The head police officer of the reservation could be reasoned with until you hit certain boundaries.
Yeah. So Matthias, that was his name.
Yes, that's it.
And I'm really glad that, again, I'm glad that we had that expression of genuine psychopathy, this person that does not use logic, that is constantly a bully, and the only way you can deal with them is directly. Usually in an equally terrible way. But going back to Jacob is, especially in the latter seasons, probably one of my favorite characters because of how nuanced.
He's complex.
Yes.
Yeah, he's neither all good nor all bad. And you could almost picture a television series featuring Nighthorse in the same way that what's that new Sylvester Stallone series about
I don't
Kansas?
I have no idea.
Topeka? I think it's called.
Oh, where he's an ex, or a mob boss type character.
He gets out of prison and he gets exiled to like the breadbasket of America, or wherever, the desert, someplace like that. Yeah. And he starts building his empire again. So this is not a good guy. This is a criminal. This is a criminal who builds his criminal empire by strong-arming the first people he meets. But eventually they all become his friends, and you kind of root for that character in that way that you always root for the protagonist. I mean, that's Breaking Bad too. Walt goes from being a wimp and a mild-mannered chemistry professor who's kind of pushed around by life to becoming Scarface by the end of the series. He's a horrible villain who's done horrible things, but you're rooting for him through most of that, even when he makes mistakes, because you naturally root for the perspective character. This is one of the reasons that in Terminator, they had to strip all of Arnold Schwarzenegger's humanity away for the climax of the film, because until he becomes an evil metal skeleton, you're kind of hoping that he succeeds. Like, you're riding along with him. The Jackal with Bruce Willis is another one where for most of his buildup, you're like, yes, I would like to see this assassin succeed. I don't care about Richard Gere or Sidney Poitier or any of the other people in this film.
Yeah, actually. Well, okay. So Jacob, though, we only ever, in 6 seasons, we only realize one, and it's only one crime that's ever really proven that's real, like crime, and that is he borrows money from the Irish mob guy, in which case Jacob actually becomes the victim.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you borrow money from the Irish mob. But
Yeah.
I, looking back at all of Jacob, I see him as he's genuinely concerned for his people. He was more blessed in his upbringing because I think it said he was raised by a white woman and had some affluence in his early life, but he genuinely has a heart for the Cheyenne people, and everything he does really is for them from his perspective.
Well,
And
it's tempered by his desire to enrich himself,
well,
which is
right,
that
there's
it's
that
flawed.
right, and there's that old thing that I detest when I hear people say it. It's like, oh, to do good, you have to be good, and it's like, um, but from his perspective, it's like, well, I can't accomplish that except through massive monetary gain. And I think that he comes to realize that, well, maybe I've been going about this the wrong way when he hires Katie, because
Yeah.
he begins to realize that, well, the actual on the ground personal problems of the tribe, that's where you start. And he even, throws a lot of his money for free, no strings attached, for the first time in the show at Katie. And that all goes to heck. But I think for the most part, his intentions, as far as he understands, are pure and for the good of his people. But it's just that old um, people don't like him because he's wealthy, and but hey, he's the guy. He's the reason that Walt stayed, out of, well, it wasn't prison because it was a civil suit, but he's the reason that Walt
Right.
won that court case. Because in
Yeah.
spite of their differences, he recognized in Walt's unerring dedication to his morals, and that was the reason why he spoke positively for Walt.
Yeah.
So
And
to
as
me, that sealed him.
desperately as Walt wanted to get him so badly, but
Yeah,
not to the point where he would lie to do it. And confronted with the reality, here's a piece of truth that means Jacob didn't do it. Walt's like, okay,
yeah, yeah,
I'll fight. I wanted to put him in jail.
yeah,
Jerk.
exactly. Every time. Yeah. Um, so I don't know what the bigger lesson there is. I guess it's don't judge a book, and just
Well,
because you feel something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true, and so on.
it also gives the character, like, we cannot see Walt exercise his moral code until he's put in difficult, complex situations. If everyone is two-dimensional and either very good or very bad, then he doesn't really have to exercise his moral faculty. He's not conflicted in any way. The movie Falling Down with Michael Douglas, that movie could have been so much better than it was, because while Michael Douglas is busy having his elaborate histrionics and shooting up the neighborhood to get even with all of these people who have wronged him and continue to wrong him, they're all two-dimensional. There's nothing redeeming about any of them. So if the people that he came into conflict with were not two-dimensional monsters of people, then we wouldn't be able to root so handily for him shooting up a McDonald's full of shiftless workers, or rude construction workers getting what's coming to them, or the supremacist store owner getting what's coming to him. Like, if any of them were decent people who happened to have offended him, then we would feel moral conflict, and the movie could have been much more complex. At the same time, when Walt is dealing with other people, the only way he exercises his moral muscle is if he's like, gosh, this is complicated. Who's good or bad here? It's hard. And that's when you see his character come out. When it's just two-dimensional, like, this guy is shooting at me, clearly the moral thing is to shoot back. So,
Sure.
that's partly a construction just to keep him interesting.
Yeah. And I guess lastly about Jacob, like, one of his problems, and so it's funny when the converse happens to him and it's his ultimate undoing, um, and almost demise. He likes to, it would seem he likes to own people, and we've all known some rich guy that likes to do that, and now you owe me kind of thing. But in reality, I think that's again his expression of trying to help his people. He's always buying people's debt and all of that, and he has to learn the lesson with Malachi that just because someone is of your, just because you grant someone a mercy and because you see the best in them, doesn't mean that they're a good person or that you can change people that way. That
Yeah,
it,
Malachi, he's one of the few characters who's genuinely just
he's
all bad.
genuinely evil.
You know,
Yeah,
he has very few redeeming qualities. He's very well played by the actor who plays him, who I think really relished getting to be, that kind
yeah,
of villainous role. I think the only thing I can remember seeing him in is maybe in the Tommy Lee Jones U.S. Marshals movie. I think he's part of the Marshal
oh,
crew in The Fugitive
and
and
he
so on.
was in one of my favorite Val Kilmer movies, Thunderheart. He was,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
He's a great actor and he plays the role very well, but Malachi really has no redeeming qualities at all.
yeah.
And to the point that he individually bedevils every major character, Nighthorse, Henry,
Mhm.
Walt. Like it's like he's looking at a list of whose turn is it for me to menace today.
Yeah, and he out devils the bigger devils in the show, like Shane Muldoon, who is the leader of
Yes.
the mob. Yeah,
Yes, you never fear a Shane Muldoon as much as you are viscerally repelled by Malachi, who's very
yeah,
good at that sort of oily, I'm going to speak to you all polite, but we both know I'm shoving a
yes,
knife in your ribs.
yes, and that's the beauty of the character is like he doesn't have to try to be threatening. He just is like, yeah,
Yeah.
here's what, and he slaps a hunk of money on the table and walks away, the kind of thing. Yeah, um, which is a perfect juxtaposition for, do I want to go there yet? Sure, why not? Um, so if I were to give a master class in masculinity, thin ice here. One of the things I would have people watch is Walt. Certain scenes from Walt in particular, but not because of his gruffness or because of stereotypical masculinity. I have a simple chart. I think I told you this a few years ago, where whoever, especially for the women in your life, the stereotypical woman, whereas they are this throughout, and you can add any nomenclature you want to this graph, and it still works, by the way. You should be this.
Yeah, he's stoic. For the
Sure.
most
Yeah.
part, his
Yeah.
emotions are under control. He's steady. That's what we think of as a leader. And even when he's maybe tormented inside,
Mhm.
outwardly he's steady
Yeah.
because that is that virtue of male masculine stoicism. Nobody rallies to the leader who's clearly freaking out. They rally to the leader who doesn't look like he's freaking out, even if inside he might
Even
be.
if he is, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's why it's important to have some kind of moral compass, whether you have a, whatever, have something because that's the only thing that's going to keep you together when everything's going to hell. But also another scene, perhaps, that is exemplary to me is diverging here, but Casablanca is um, Bogart's portrayal because he's not just reflecting the style and the vernacular of the time, but even for that time, he's not threatening. He's like at the end there, he's like, well, if you do this, here's what I'm gonna do. And without blinking, he just pulls his gun and shoots the guy, knowing full well what the consequences of doing that are gonna be, and that he's gonna have to leave this woman that he loves selflessly to the okay. So there, it's like just simply doing what you say you're going to do. It doesn't necessarily mean being gruff and spitting in the wind and whatever, and wearing cowboy boots.
Well,
Consistency and strength of character, as subtle as it
there's
may
a
be.
there's an element of non-reactivity there too.
Yeah, very,
The most stalwart masculine characters are what we call non-reactive. So they do not rise to provocations that might cause other people to lose their temper or freak out because they are untroubled because they are supremely confident. So the Daniel Craig James Bond, most of the time he is non-reactive. He doesn't,
mhm.
if you insult him to his face, he doesn't get into a war of words with you. He's just like, yeah, whatever. He doesn't care because you are insignificant to him. Bogart, you don't think much of me, do you? I don't think anything of you. That is
Yeah,
clearly, and they stole that from Mad Men. if I remember correctly. I think John Hamm's character has exactly the same exchange with some mealy-mouthed little worm of a character. I don't think about you at all, because non-reactivity is a sort of a visual, emotional shortcut to confidence. Because you can't be non-reactive unless you're either confident or you're unplugged and you're a zombie. Zombies are non-reactive, but not in a way that matters. Whereas confident, capable people are non-reactive because they don't need to rise to your provocations. Think about all the viral videos of people shrieking in reaction. Like I saw one just the other day where some woman didn't like the fact that the guy was criticizing her. So she started screaming at him to shut up. And when he wouldn't shut up just because she demanded it, she started shrieking at the top of her vocal range, "You're making it worse," as if shrieking somehow conveys any kind of power, when in fact what it does is it makes you look unhinged and weak. So that non-reactivity is really integral to every tough guy character.
Yeah. Of course, I would add to that similarly, you don't go around poking and prodding and inciting people that when you know how they're likely to react, but causing
it's
unnecessary
like,
chaos.
how's that old song go? Don't pull Steven Seagal's ponytail.
What? I don't know.
There's in Out for Justice, which is really, the whole movie is just Steven Seagal traveling to a series of locations and beating up the people he finds there, and then revisiting those locations. There's a character who he walks into the bar, and the guy's like, "I see you still comb your hair like a girl." And I just remember that line because it's so funny, because he was in full ponytail regalia at that time. And, this was Steven Seagal in his physical prime before he started declining. And, in part it's because the guy got old. We all get old. But, when you try to stay 30 years old forever and you're spray painting your hair on, it doesn't always go well.
Yeah.
The people who aged more gracefully, like Mark Dacascos. You look at early footage of Mark Dacascos with his jet black hair. Well, when he started to lose his hair, he didn't start Steven Seagal spray painting it on. He just shaved his head. And Bruce Willis, same thing. Bruce Willis never had hair. Like, very young Bruce Willis is receding and has a widow's peak. And you're like, at what point did you just make the decision to be like, we can lose that? So I forgot how I got on this tangent. What were we talking about?
I don't know. Steven Seagal. What about Steven? Don't pull Steven Seagal's ponytail.
Right. Because you want there to be, when a character has made it known, like, I'm not going to react, but if you push me over a line, I will react and you won't like it. Well, when that gets established, then people don't mess with that character. It's like, leave him be. Don't mess with him. And you have to walk a fine line, because if you want to establish that your character is a tough guy, showing other characters go, "Oh, don't mess with him. That's so-and-so." And Steven Seagal, we just talked about him, has used that as a shortcut in the movie. It's whichever movie that has the oil platform and it has this weird heavy-handed environmental message. It's not Fire Down Below, but it's another one along those lines. But characters in that
movie.
Yeah, but characters in that movie spend an awful lot of time talking about what a tough guy Steven Seagal is,
Okay.
And I think R. Lee Ermey has an extended monologue where his only job is to talk about how tough Steven Seagal is, as the bad guy trying to kill Steven Seagal. So, you can go overboard in having your other characters go, "Oh, don't mess with him. He'll react." There's a fine line.
Although that is basically the entire premise of John Wick. Like
Yes, and
the setup for the entire first movie.
In Escape from New York, when every character greets Kurt Russell with, "Snake Plissken, I thought you were dead," that's exactly the same thing as, "Oh my gosh, it's Baba Yaga, it's John Wick, don't mess with him." And they do a beautiful job of not ham-fisting it when Vigo is talking to someone who informs him, forget who it is he's talking to. He's talking to John Leguizamo. Like, I hear you struck my son. Well, yeah, I did, and it's because he stole John Wick's car and killed his dog. And Vigo's only response is, "Oh." And then better, when he calls Wick on the phone, John has no dialogue.
There's nothing. He
lets Vigo go, to the point that it's clear to both of them that this isn't going to work and you're not going to talk your way out of this.
Right.
And Vigo knows, but he still has to make the attempt. So
Yeah.
when Wick hangs up on him, he's like, "Well, went about like I thought it would." And in some ways, there will never be a better John Wick villain than Vigo, because he had so much personality. When
Yeah.
they have their final fight, he doesn't stand a chance, but he still does it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he was a big, tough dude. I think I saw some Sambo in there. Vigo was a tough
Yeah,
dude,
but
but he's
the
not
point
John
of John
Wick.
Wick is,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, the point of John Wick is to kill John Wick, you need to bring multiple people who are at John Wick level.
Yeah.
And so there are fight scenes like his fight scene with the two guys from the raid or one of
Oh
them is from the
man.
raid.
Okay,
Those Indonesian guys.
wait. I mean, we're okay. So foreshadowing for future episodes. We're actually bleeding into the next episode of this. So let's save this conversation for another time.
Okay.
And
But
I'm what?
my point is just there is a subtle way to have your characters be so in awe of another character, and I think John
Mhm.
Wick does that well.
Okay, agreed. And I want to bring this full circle to back to Malachi. What I described is why Malachi is the ultimate bad guy reflection of Walt. It's because similarly, they are, as you would say, unaffected. They're very cool about everything. They don't have to be tough.
Yes,
Deeply
when he's
stoic.
trying to scare Malachi won't break. He's got a gun to his head, and Malachi's like, "Well, if you're going to shoot me, I guess you better get to it."
Yeah. Mhm. Um, all right. Well, today's episode was brought to you by Starbucks Sumatra Blend, and I highly recommend it. Thank you for doing this,
Nice.
Phil, and have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.